The smell of burning rubber and bleach hit me like a slap across the face as I jolted awake at 2:30 in the morning. 3 black pickup trucks and a minivan with Homeowners Association patrol blazed across the side, sat in my driveway, headlights cutting through my bedroom window like prison searchlights. Karen Johnson's voice crackled through a megaphone, sharp and commanding. "Illegal occupation of municipal property. Vacate the premises immediately." I stumbled outside in nothing but jeans and a torn Carhartt shirt, my bare feet hitting the cold gravel, the taste of sleep still thick in my mouth. "Karen, this is my land. Been mine since 1987. She waved a rolled-up document like a weapon, her sister Melinda flanking her right side with that same smug expression they both perfected. "Not as of this morning, Mayor Anderson. You're occupying the community lake zone." That's when I saw it, in her pudgy fingers, torn clean in half, my old fishing license, the one with my father's signature as witness from when I was 12, the only thing I had left from our Saturday mornings on this very water. "You had no right." "We have every right." Karen's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper she used in city council meetings. "This land belongs to the community now. You've got until sunrise to pack your things." Brother Rick stepped out of the lead truck, power tools rattling in the bed behind him. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Tom." I looked at the torn license in her hand. Dad's careful handwriting on the witness line, now ripped right through the middle. My chest tightened like someone was squeezing my lungs with both hands. "Get off my property." Karen smiled, not the fake politician smile she wore at ribbon cuttings. This was something else, something hungry. "Your property?" She held up that document again. "I've got news for you, Mr. Mayor. As of 6 a.m. this morning, this entire shoreline was rezoned as protected wetlands, municipal property, which means you've been trespassing for," she checked her watch, "about 20 hours now." The radio in her minivan crackled to life. Sheriff's dispatch. My stomach dropped to somewhere around my ankles. "You called the cops on me, on the mayor of this town?" "I called them on a trespasser who happens to be breaking federal environmental law." Karen's megaphone squealed with feedback as she raised it again. 20 minutes, Tom. Then we start removing your belongings for you." I stood there in my bare feet, gravel digging into my soles, watching truck engines idle and exhaust curl up into the night air. These people, my constituents, the ones who smiled and waved during my morning jogs, they were about to tear apart everything I'd built with my own hands. The fishing license fluttered to the ground between us, 2 pieces of my childhood scattered in the dirt. That's when I learned something about small-town politics that no campaign manual ever teaches you. When someone wants your land bad enough, they'll find a way to make you the criminal for living on it. And Karen Johnson, she was just getting started. The power saw's scream cut through the morning air like nails on a chalkboard, jerking me awake from what little sleep I'd managed. 7 a.m. sharp, and they were back. I stumbled to my kitchen window, still in yesterday's clothes. Karen's municipal commission had multiplied overnight. Now there were 5 vehicles, including a white van with environmental assessment stenciled on the side in official-looking letters. Rick Johnson stood at my fence line with a circular saw, cutting sample pieces from the cedar posts I'd installed myself 3 summers ago. Wood chips flew everywhere, coating his work boots in sawdust. "Morning, Tom." Melinda Johnson appeared at my back door without knocking, clipboard in hand, and that same saccharine smile her sister wore. Behind her stood a thin man in a cheap suit, holding a tablet like it was the Holy Grail. "You can't just walk onto my property." "Environmental assessment team." The suit extended his hand. "State certified. We're here about the septic violations." I stared at him. "What septic violations?" Rick's saw went quiet. In that sudden silence, I heard Karen's voice from somewhere near the water. "Initial reading shows contamination levels 3 times the federal limit." My blood turned to ice water. "That's impossible. I had that system inspected last year." The suit consulted his tablet. "According to our preliminary tests, your septic system is leaching directly into the lake watershed. That's a federal violation, Mr. Anderson. $4,800 fine, plus mandatory removal costs of $12,000. $12,000? The number hit me like a physical blow. "You can't be serious." But he was already walking toward my septic access, Rick trailing behind with what looked like a soil auger. These people moved like they'd done this dance before. I followed them outside, my bare feet sliding in yesterday's morning dew. That's when I saw the red flags, dozens of them, planted around my property like grave markers, each one marked with environmental hazard in bold black letters. What the hell is this? Contamination zone markers, Melinda said, not looking up from her clipboard. For public safety, we've already notified your immediate neighbors about the potential health risks. My neighbor Frank's kitchen window curtain twitched. He was watching all right, probably wondering why the mayor's place looked like a toxic waste site. Karen emerged from the tree line near the water, holding what looked like a water testing kit. Her smile could have powered the town streetlights. Tom, perfect timing. We're just documenting the extent of your ecological damage. There is no ecological damage. Bacterial count is off the charts. She waved a test strip that looked suspiciously dark. E. coli, nitrogen compounds, chemical phosphates. Tom, this is serious. The suit looked up from his tablet. Mr. Anderson, we're going to need you to cease all water usage immediately. Kitchen, bathroom, everything. This is now a biohazard zone. I felt my world tilt sideways. You can't cut off my water. I'm the mayor of this town. The mayor who's been poisoning the community water supply. Rick stood up from the septic access, holding a soil sample that looked black as motor oil. How long you been dumping chemicals out here, Tom? I haven't been dumping anything. But even as I said it, I knew how it looked. Mayor's property suddenly declared a toxic waste site. Environmental team with official papers and test results. Red flags marking contamination zones. By noon, 3 more neighbors had come out to their yards, standing at a safe distance but close enough to whisper and point. Mrs. Patterson from down the road actually covered her mouth with a handkerchief when she walked past. That's when I understood the genius of Karen's plan. She wasn't just taking my land. She was destroying my reputation, my credibility, my standing in the community, making me into the villain who'd been secretly poisoning everyone's drinking water. And the worst part, I could see it working. The doubt creeping into my neighbors' eyes, the way they kept their distance. The suit handed me a clipboard thick with forms. You'll need to sign here, acknowledging receipt of the violation notice, and here, agreeing to the immediate cessation of all septic system usage. My hand shook as I held the pen. 16 years as mayor of this town, 16 years of pothole repairs and budget meetings and ribbon cuttings, all of it crumbling because of some test strips and soil samples that appeared overnight. Oh, and Tom? Karen's voice drifted across the yard, sweet as poisoned honey. Channel 7 News is doing a story on environmental violations by public officials. They'll be here around 3. The pen slipped from my fingers and hit the gravel with a tiny metallic sound. The road closure signs went up at dawn on day 3. Big orange barriers with a environmental cleanup in progress, blocking the only way to my house. I stood at my kitchen window, watching Rick Johnson hammer posts into the asphalt like he was staking a claim. My phone had died sometime during the night. Not that it mattered. The cell tower mysteriously went dark around midnight, right after I'd tried calling my lawyer. Routine maintenance, according to the automated message. The refrigerator hummed empty. Last can of coffee gone yesterday morning. My truck sat useless in the garage. Even if I could get around the barriers, Karen's people had set up what looked like scientific equipment right in the middle of the road. Big white boxes with antennas and blinking lights. Atmospheric monitoring, Melinda had explained when I'd tried to walk out yesterday. Checking for toxic gas emissions from your property? Toxic gas from my septic system, right? I watched Rick finish with the barriers and pull out his phone. 30 seconds later, I saw movement through the trees. A line of people walking up the old deer trail that connected to Maple Street. Melinda led the group, wearing a bright yellow vest that said Environmental Justice across the back. Behind her came 8 or 9 locals I recognized. Patricia Murphy from the flower shop, Jeff Chen, who ran the hardware store, even old Bill Watson from the VFW, holding what looked like a homemade sign. They formed a semicircle at the edge of my property line, just outside the red flag perimeter, close enough to make their point, far enough to stay safe from whatever contamination I was supposedly spreading. Melinda pulled out a bullhorn. Her voice echoed off the water behind my house. Citizens of Pinewood Lake have the right to clean water. Environmental criminals must be held accountable. The group started chanting, something about justice and responsibility. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught Mayor Anderson and poison and our children repeated over and over. Mrs. Patterson held up a sign that said, "Protect our kids," in red marker. The same Mrs. Patterson who'd brought me casseroles after my wife Martha died, who'd hugged me at the grocery store just last month and told me what a good job I was doing for the community. That's when I noticed the cameras. Jeff Chen had his phone out, streaming live to Facebook. Patricia Murphy was doing the same. A dozen phone screens pointed at my house like tiny spotlights. The chanting got louder. "Clean water now! Clean water now!" I opened my front door and stepped onto the porch. The chanting stopped like someone had hit a kill switch. "Patricia," I called out. "Jeff, you know me. You know I'd never hurt this community." Bill Watson stepped forward, his weathered face hard as granite. "Tom, I served 3 tours in Vietnam. Came back to water I could drink and air I could breathe. My grandson swims in this lake. Bill, there's no contamination. Then why won't you let the inspectors do their job?" Melinda's voice cut through mine like a blade. "Why are you hiding behind your political office?" "I'm not hiding behind anything." "Then prove it." Patricia Murphy's voice shook with emotion. "Let them test everything. Let them fix whatever you've done wrong." I felt something crack inside my chest. These weren't strangers. These were people who'd voted for me, trusted me, people whose kids I'd watched grow up, whose small businesses I'd helped with permits and zoning issues. Now they were looking at me like I was the enemy. Jeff Chen raised his phone higher. "Mayor Anderson, will you commit to paying for the environmental cleanup? Will you resign if the tests prove you've been poisoning our water?" The questions hit like bullets. Resignation, cleanup costs, criminal liability. I could see the headlines already. Mayor poisons lake, refuses accountability. Behind the crowd, barely visible through the trees, I spotted a familiar figure. Karen Johnson, standing next to what looked like a news van. She wasn't chanting or holding signs. She was just watching, waiting. 48 hours, Melinda announced to her crowd and their cameras. If Mayor Anderson doesn't cooperate with the environmental assessment by Friday morning, we're filing a federal complaint. The crowd cheered, phone cameras kept rolling, and somewhere in the distance I heard the rumble of more vehicles heading down Maple Street. My neighbors walked away through the trees, leaving me alone on my porch. The only sound was water lapping against my dock and the steady hum of those mysterious white boxes in the middle of the road. That night, I sat in my dark kitchen and tried to figure out how 16 years of public service had turned me into public enemy number 1 in less than 72 hours. But Karen had made one mistake. She'd given me 48 hours. Time enough to figure out what she was really after. Chuck's Pine Lodge bar sat 3 miles down the old county road, far enough from Karen's roadblocks that I could reach it on foot through the timber trail. The smell of stale beer and wood smoke hit me as I pushed through the heavy oak door, my boots crunching on peanut shells scattered across the floor. "Tom," Chuck looked up from wiping glasses, his weathered face creasing into a frown. "Hell of a thing, what they're saying about you on the news?" I slumped onto a bar stool, feeling every one of my 51 years. "Pour me a double bourbon, Chuck. Make it the good stuff." The whiskey burned going down, but it was the first warm thing I'd felt in 3 days. Ice clinked against the glass as Chuck refilled it without being asked. "You know what doesn't sit right with me?" Chuck leaned against the bar, lowering his voice even though we were alone. "Karen and her sister have been buying up lakefront property all summer. Cash deals, way under market value." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean buying up property?" Chuck disappeared into the back room and returned with a manila folder thick with papers. "Frank Morrison's place, sold last month for $45,000. That property's worth at least $180, maybe more. Sarah Kellerman's cabin, same story. Bought at auction after she got hit with some kind of septic fine." My blood turned cold. "Septic fine?" "Same exact violation they're claiming against you. Contamination, federal environmental hazard, all that garbage." Chuck spread the papers across the bar. "Look at this purchase agreement. Buyer listed as Green Lake Investments, LLC. I studied the document, my lawyer instincts kicking in despite the bourbon fog. "Who's the director of this Green Lake company?" "That's the million-dollar question." Chuck tapped the signature line with a thick finger. "Corporate filings show a P.O. box in the city and a registered agent I never heard of. But Tom, I've been bartending in this town for 32 years. I know who talks to who owes what to who. He pulled out another paper, a building permit application. Green Lake Investments filed this 6 months ago. Plans for a luxury resort and marina, 100-unit hotel, spa, conference center. They want to turn this whole shoreline into some kind of rich folks' playground. The pieces clicked together in my head like tumblers in a lock. They need the waterfront properties to make it work. Every single one. And guess which property's been getting hit with environmental violations lately? Chuck's smile was grim. Funny how that works, isn't it? I downed the rest of my bourbon, feeling it burn away the helpless frustration that had been eating at me for days. Chuck, I need to use your landline. My phone service mysteriously went out. Help yourself. I called my friend Dave at the State University, the only environmental chemist I trusted. It took 20 minutes to explain the situation and convince him to drive out for unofficial water testing. Tom, if someone's faking contamination readings, I can prove it, Dave said. Real bacterial contamination leaves specific chemical signatures. Fake stuff, different story entirely. How fast can you get here? Give me 2 hours, and Tom, don't let them know I'm coming. After I hung up, Chuck poured himself a beer and settled in across from me. What's your play here? Fight fire with fire. I felt something hard and determined crystallizing in my chest. They want to destroy my reputation? Fine. But they made one critical mistake. What's that? They forgot I've been mayor of this town for 16 years. I know every dirty deal, every backroom handshake, every favor owed and debt unpaid. I stood up, feeling steadier than I had since this nightmare started. And Karen Johnson's family? They got skeletons I helped bury. Chuck raised his beer in a mock toast. Now that sounds like the Tom Anderson I know. I pulled out my wallet and left a 20 on the bar. Keep this conversation between us, Chuck, and if anyone asks, you never saw me tonight. Never saw who? Walking back through the timber in the dark, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. Not the desperate kind you cling to when you're drowning, but the cold, calculating kind that comes with a plan. Karen wanted to play dirty politics. She picked the wrong mayor. By tomorrow night, everyone in Pinewood Lake would know exactly who Green Lake Investments really was, and why they needed my land so badly they were willing to destroy a man's life to get it. The torn fishing license was still in my jacket pocket, both pieces wrapped in tissue paper. Dad always said the biggest fish required the most patience. Time to set the hook. The siren started wailing at 6 a.m, cutting through the fog that hung over the lake like a gray blanket. I was already awake, watching from my kitchen window as 3 sheriff's cruisers rolled past the environmental barriers like they owned the place. Sheriff Martinez stepped out of the lead car, his hand resting on his service weapon. Behind him came 2 deputies I didn't recognize. Young faces, serious expressions, the kind of cops who follow orders without asking questions. My front door rattled under Martinez's heavy knock. Tom Anderson, open up. We have a warrant. I opened the door in my bathrobe, making sure to look surprised and confused. Roberto, what's going on? Environmental terrorism charges. Martinez held up a folded paper that looked official enough. Willful contamination of public water supply, obstruction of federal investigation, and resisting environmental enforcement. Environmental terrorism? The words felt like broken glass in my mouth. Roberto, you've known me for 15 years. Step aside, Tom. This is bigger than both of us now. They pushed past me into my living room, boots tracking mud across Martha's Persian rug. One deputy headed for my home office, while the other started photographing everything. My coffee maker, my fishing gear, even the stack of city council meeting notes on my kitchen table. You're making a mistake, I said, but Martinez wasn't listening. He was reading from a prepared script, probably written by someone in a suit who'd never set foot in Pinewood Lake. That's when I saw her through my living room window, Karen Johnson standing beside a Channel 7 news van, talking earnestly into a reporter's microphone. She wore a dark blue blazer, the kind politicians wear when they want to look serious and trustworthy. In Sheriff's Office received credible evidence that Mayor Anderson has been deliberately contaminating lake water to cover up illegal septic modifications, the reporter was saying. Sources close to the investigation suggest this may be connected to a broader pattern of municipal corruption. Municipal corruption. I almost laughed. In 16 years as mayor, the biggest scandal we'd had was when somebody stole the traffic cone from Main Street. Tom Anderson, you're under arrest. Martinez pulled out handcuffs that caught the morning light like silver snakes. You have the right to remain silent. The words faded into background noise as I watched Karen through the window. She was pointing at my house, explaining something to the camera with animated gestures. Concerned citizen doing her civic duty. Brave whistleblower exposing government corruption. The handcuffs clicked shut around my wrists with a sound like breaking bones. They perp-walked me past the news cameras in my bathrobe and slippers, Martinez's hand firm on my shoulder. Karen made sure to position herself in the background of every shot, close enough to be associated with my arrest, far enough away to maintain plausible deniability. Mayor Anderson, did you knowingly poison the water supply? A reporter shoved a microphone in my face as they loaded me into the cruiser. Any comment on the environmental terrorism charges? Will you resign from office? I kept my mouth shut, but inside my head, I was screaming. 18 hours in county lockup, waiting for my lawyer to post bail. 18 hours watching local news coverage that painted me as some kind of ecological monster. Former Environmental Compliance Officer Karen Johnson first raised concerns about Mayor Anderson's property last week. The anchor said, over footage of Karen pointing at official-looking documents. Johnson, who previously worked for the State Environmental Protection Agency, says she noticed unusual bacterial readings during routine lake testing. Former Environmental Compliance Officer. Of course. That's how she knew exactly which regulations to cite, which agencies to call, which forms to file. She'd probably written half the rules she was using to destroy me. By the time my lawyer got me out, the damage was done. My mayoral approval rating had dropped to 18% according to an online poll. The city council called an emergency session to discuss leadership transition during environmental crisis. 3 protesters waited outside the courthouse with handmade signs. Resign Toxic Tom and Lake Killer in red marker on poster board. One of them was filming everything on her phone for what looked like a Facebook live stream. I walked to my truck with as much dignity as I could manage, keys shaking in my hand. The protesters followed, chanting something about children's health and government accountability. That's when I saw Dave's university van parked across the street. He caught my eye and nodded toward the coffee shop on the corner, our agreed meeting spot. 20 minutes later, we sat in a back booth while Dave spread water test results across the scratched Formica table. Tom, there's no contamination in that lake. None. The water's cleaner than it's been in years. Dave tapped a chart with his pen. But here's the interesting part. Those soil samples they claim came from your septic system, they're not from your property. What do you mean? Chemical composition is all wrong. Your soil has high iron content, low clay, typical for this region. These samples, high clay content, different mineral profile entirely. They came from somewhere else. I stared at the test results, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my stomach. They planted evidence. Gets better. I found traces of commercial bacterial cultures in their samples, the kind labs use for testing water treatment systems. Someone dumped laboratory E. coli into regular dirt and called it septic contamination. That night, I sat in my truck outside Karen's house, watching lights move behind drawn curtains. A Green Lake investment sign had appeared in her front yard sometime during my arrest. Future home of Lakeside Manor Resort. Future home, like the deal was already done. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Resign by Friday or face federal charges. This is your last chance. I looked at the torn fishing license on my dashboard, both pieces taped together with clear tape. Dad's signature still visible through the crack. Some fish fight harder when they know they're caught. Time to see how hard Karen could fight. The sound of heavy machinery woke me before dawn. Bulldozers and excavators rumbling down the county road like mechanical thunder. I looked out my bedroom window to see Karen's environmental cleanup crew setting up a staging area in what used to be Frank Morrison's front yard. The irony was perfect. They were using the property they had already stolen to launch the final assault on mine. My phone showed 17 missed calls from reporters, 12 from city council members, and 1 from my ex-wife in Phoenix asking if I'd finally lost my damn mind, like she always predicted. But the message that mattered was from Dave. Lab analysis complete. Meet me at the usual spot. Chuck's bar was empty except for an old-timer, nursing a beer and watching morning news with the volume turned low. I found Dave in the back booth, surrounded by manila folders and looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Tom, this is bigger than we thought." He slid a thick report across the table. I analyzed everything. Their soil samples, water tests, even some equipment I borrowed from their staging area. "You broke into their site. Let's call it aggressive environmental research." Dave's grin was tired but triumphant. "They're not just faking contamination. They're systematically poisoning test samples with commercial bacterial cultures, then using those results to declare environmental emergencies." I flipped through pages of chemical analysis, bacterial counts, soil composition charts. "How many properties?" "At least 8 around the lake. Same pattern every time. Mysterious contamination appears overnight. Property values collapse. Green Lake Investments swoops in with cash offers." Dave pulled out a map marked with red X's. "They've been running this scam for months." "And the environmental agency, the state inspectors?" "That's the beautiful part. Karen's former connections fast-track every emergency declaration. No secondary testing, no independent verification. Her word is gospel." Dave's voice carried a bitter edge. "She's using her government credibility to legitimize a real estate fraud that would make the mafia jealous." I studied the map, seeing the bigger picture for the first time. Every red X was a lakefront property. Every property was crucial for the resort development. And every owner had been driven out by fabricated environmental disasters. "Dave, I need you to do something for me, something that might cost you your job." "At this point, I'm already in too deep. What do you need?" "I want you to conduct a public demonstration. Tomorrow at noon, down by the lake. Test the water in front of everyone. Media, neighbors, Karen's people, whoever shows up." Dave frowned. "Tom, that's dangerous. If Karen realizes we've exposed her operation, she'll what? Frame me for more crimes I didn't commit? Arrest me again?" I felt something hard and reckless building in my chest. "Dave, they've already destroyed my reputation, my career, and my standing in this community. What else can they take? Your freedom, your life? Then I better make sure the demonstration counts." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 16 years of politics. I called a press conference without consulting lawyers, advisors, or anyone with common sense. Channel 7 sent the same reporter who'd covered my arrest. The local paper dispatched their City Hall correspondent. Even the regional environmental newsletter showed up, probably expecting to document the final confession of a corrupt mayor. I stood on my back deck, looking out over the lake that had been the center of my world since childhood. The water sparkled in the afternoon sun, clean and pure as mountain snow. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Tomorrow at noon, I'm going to prove my innocence in the most direct way possible." I held up a glass pitcher filled with lake water. "I'm going to drink this water, right here in front of all of you." The reporter's eyes widened. "Mayor Anderson, if the water is contaminated as testing indicates, then I'll get sick. Maybe seriously sick. Maybe die." I set the pitcher on the deck railing where everyone could see it. "But if the water is clean, which it is, then someone has been lying to this community for months." "Are you saying the environmental tests are fabricated?" "I'm saying that at noon tomorrow, we'll have independent laboratory analysis conducted in full public view, real science, not bureaucratic paperwork. And when that analysis proves the water is clean, I'm going to ask some very hard questions about who benefits from fake contamination scares." That evening, my phone rang every 10 minutes, reporters wanting exclusive interviews, city council members begging me to reconsider. Even Sheriff Martinez called to suggest I might want to think this through. But the call that mattered came at midnight from an unlisted number. "You're making a mistake, Tom." Karen's voice was cold as lake ice in January. "Am I? Which mistake would that be, Karen? Trusting the environmental tests, believing in the system, or figuring out that Green Lake Investments is owned by your family?" Long silence. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different tone. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a worthy opponent. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A real estate scam dressed up as environmental protection. The only question is how many people you've fooled and for how long. That demonstration tomorrow, don't do it, Tom, for your own sake. The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen, looking at the torn fishing license taped together on my table. Dad's signature looked different in the lamplight, stronger somehow, more permanent. Tomorrow at noon, one of us was going to be exposed as a fraud. I was betting it wouldn't be me. 200 people showed up at the lake by 11:30, more than I'd ever seen at a city council meeting, a 4th of July picnic, or even the annual base tournament. They came with folding chairs and coolers, cameras and notebooks, like they were settling in for the political show of the decade. Karen arrived in a black SUV with tinted windows, followed by what looked like a legal team, 3 men in identical dark suits carrying briefcases. She wore a somber gray dress, the kind you'd wear to a funeral. Maybe she thought it would be mine. Dave set up his portable testing equipment on a folding table at the water's edge. Real laboratory gear, spectrometers, bacterial culture plates, chemical analysis strips, not the cheap test kits Karen's people had been waving around for weeks. Channel 7 positioned their cameras for the best angle. The regional environmental reporter checked her recorder twice. Even a blogger from the state capitol had driven down, probably hoping to witness either a vindication or a very public suicide. I stood at the end of my dock, holding the glass pitcher of lake water I'd filled that morning. The liquid was crystal clear, reflecting the noon sun like liquid diamond. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, my voice carrying across the water. "Before I drink this water, I want to make something clear. If it's contaminated as the environmental reports claim, I'll be hospitalized within hours, maybe dead by tonight." The crowd went completely silent. Even the kids stopped playing and stared. But if this water is clean, which independent testing will prove, then someone has been lying to this community for months. Someone with access to official letterhead, environmental testing credentials, and the authority to destroy people's lives with fabricated evidence. I raised the pitcher toward Karen, who stood 30 feet away with her legal team. "Karen Johnson, you've accused me of poisoning this lake. You've had me arrested, destroyed my reputation, and tried to steal my land based on environmental tests that you conducted." Karen stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Tom, don't be an idiot. Even if you're right about the contamination, drinking untested water in front of cameras is political suicide." "Political suicide?" I laughed, feeling something wild and reckless bubbling up in my chest. "Karen, you already killed my political career. The only question now is whether you did it with lies." I turned to face the crowd, holding the pitcher high where everyone could see. "I've lived on this lake for 51 years. My father taught me to fish in these waters when I was 6 years old. My wife and I swam here on our honeymoon. This lake is cleaner now than it's been in decades." Dave looked up from his testing equipment. "Tom, preliminary readings show 0 bacterial contamination, 0 chemical pollutants, 0 environmental hazards of any kind." The crowd murmured, a ripple of confusion and growing understanding. I brought the pitcher to my lips and drank deeply. The water tasted like childhood summers and Saturday mornings with Dad, clean and cold and pure as trust. "Now," I said, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, "let's talk about Green Lake Investments." Karen's face went white as lake ice. I pulled out the manila folder Chuck had given me, thick with property records and corporate filings. "This company has purchased 8 lakefront properties in the past 6 months. Every single property was declared environmentally contaminated shortly before the sale. Every single contamination report was filed by Karen Johnson or her associates." "That's coincidence," Karen said, but her voice cracked like thin ice. "Is it coincidence that Green Lake Investments' corporate address is a P.O. box registered to Melinda Johnson? Is it coincidence that Rick Johnson's construction company got the cleanup contracts for every contaminated property?" The crowd was turning, literally turning to stare at Karen and her family. I could see the moment when understanding hit, the sharp intake of breath, the angry murmurs, the phones coming out to record everything. "Tom, you don't understand the complexity of environmental law." "I understand fraud when I see it." I held up Dave's test results. "Independent laboratory analysis shows this lake water is cleaner than city tap water. Your contamination reports were fabricated using commercial bacterial cultures purchased from biological supply companies." Dave stepped forward with a sealed evidence bag. I found bacterial culture packaging in the Johnson property dumpster, same strains that appeared in their soil samples. The crowd exploded, shouts of anger, demands for explanations, cameras flashing like lightning. Karen backed toward her SUV, but Sheriff Martinez was already walking through the crowd with handcuffs ready. Karen Johnson, you're under arrest for environmental fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and filing false reports with federal agencies. As they led her away, I pulled the torn fishing license from my pocket, both pieces carefully taped together, Dad's signature still visible through the crack. "This belonged to my father," I called out to the crowd. "Karen tore it up 3 days ago when she tried to steal my land, but some things don't stay broken just because someone wants them destroyed." 6 months later, Karen and her siblings were convicted on 14 counts of fraud. Green Lake Investments was dissolved, and the stolen properties were returned to their original owners at fair market value. I didn't run for re-election. The town forgave me, but I never quite forgave myself for not seeing the scam earlier, for letting good people suffer while I played by rules that didn't exist. These days, I spend most mornings on my dock with a cup of coffee and my father's fishing license, both pieces now framed together, crack and all. The lake is still clean, still pure, still home. Sometimes the biggest fish aren't the ones that got away. Sometimes they're the ones that fought back when someone tried to steal the water they lived in. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and stubborn enough, you can land them after all.